Welcome to Bronx Tales. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about 139th Street in the Bronx versus the Zulu Nation. Now, growing up on 139th Street in the Bronx back in the late 70s and early 80s was tough for a lot of people, those who were young and those who were old. Those who were young most of the time played games. We played in the streets. We had to pretty much fend for ourselves, right? We were cold. We were hungry most of the time. Our parents weren't home most of the time when we got home from school. And when we went to school in the morning, our parents didn't make us breakfast. At least my mother didn't. And so most of the time I was tired, cold, and hungry. And so that made it really difficult for me to go to school, to be in school, and to stay in school. And so a lot of the times I didn't go to school. A lot of the times I stayed home from school or I pretty much stayed in the streets and try to figure out ways to stay busy while being out of school. And a lot of the times I would ride the trains. I would sneak into a movie theater. I would find ways to stay busy when I wasn't in school, right? And along the way, you would meet people. You would meet people from Manhattan, from Brooklyn. It didn't matter where you were in New York, there was always someone new, especially girls, right? One of the things about growing up on 139th Street was that we attracted a lot of people, a lot of young people, especially girls, because we had a lot of guys on that street. Growing up with Raymond, Jesse, Pachito, Jeje, Tonin, Chitin, Belto, all kinds of guys, right? Little Manny, Negrito, Tito, Mikey. I mean, I can go on and on and on. Leche. If I continue to mention the guys that I grew up with, each time one comes to mind, I'll be here. I'll be here all day, right? And so we also had girls, right? We had Tata, Lily, we had Vilma, we had Lali, Sonia, Debbie. I mean, it was just one of those blocks where there were a lot of kids, right? And so that attracted other kids from other neighborhoods. And so there was this group of girls who came from Manhattan who were friends of my boys Elio, Kenny, Marisol, and Jackie, right? These girls came from Manhattan. One of their names was Gigi. I'm not sure what the other one's name was. I think it was Carmen, if I'm not mistaken. And they brought this girl named Paula, who at the time was 11 years old, but she looked 18. I was about 12, maybe 13, but I think I was around 12. Now, Paula was fine, okay? Now, I know I said she was 11. Mind you, I was 12. But this girl looked like she was 18. And she smoked cigarettes too. And so the first time I smoked a cigarette was when she was around, because they came around and they were smoking in the handball court across the street from 440 where I lived. And so I wanted to show off, and so I lit a cigarette and I smoked the whole thing. That was the first time I ever touched the cigarette. It was the first time I ever smoked the whole cigarette. And let me tell you, I'm glad I did, because it was the worst experience of my life. I got so sick, I went home. I felt like throwing up. I was nauseous. I was physically ill. And I never again, to this day, touched another cigarette. I was 12 years old then. I never smoked a cigarette again. I never touched it. And so one day, right, me and this girl, Paula, we hooked up. She liked me and I liked her. And so we hooked up. And I started traveling to Manhattan, Spanish Harlem, 103rd Street in Manhattan. I get on the number 6 train on Brook Avenue, and then I take the 6 train south to 110th Street, right? And then I would walk. And so when I was visiting her regularly, almost every day, one day she copped an attitude, right? And she says, "You don't have to come by every day." I found that kind of strange, right? But of course, you know, it was what it was. And so I disappeared for a couple of days. And then around 3 days later, maybe, I showed up. I got on the train. I got off on 110th Street. And then I walked to 103rd. And so when I got there, she didn't seem happy to see me. And come to find out, she was dating this grown ass man who was in his 20s. I believe he was like 23. Now, mind you, she was 11 and she looked 18. She was tall. She was full figured. I mean, she was full figured, maybe C or D cups, and an ass like you've never seen. And so she was dating this 20 something year old. His name was Gemini. And he was a white boy with blonde hair or red hair, but he was Puerto Rican, right? They called him Gemini. And so when I found out that she was seeing this guy, I said to her, "You're seeing that white boy?" And so, of course, after a while, I left, I went home. And because I liked her, I would go back to Manhattan to 103rd. And so one day I went back, and when I got there, this guy, Gemini, just happened to come by while I was sitting on a bench outside. And he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, you called me a white boy?" I guess he felt disrespected because when you're Puerto Rican and you call someone a white boy, I guess it's offensive. I mean, growing up, we had a guy in the Bronx who was Puerto Rican who we called white boy. Everybody had a name. It depends on what you looked like. There was even a guy we called Monkey. And when you asked him what his name was, he would say Monkey because he walked like this, right? So he looked like a monkey, not with his face, but just the overall look, right? And so when I said, "Hey, so you're seeing this white boy?" And she told him, she went and she told him. Typical girl, ridiculous, right? There was no need for her to tell him that. It wasn't like I was being offensive. I maybe in a way I was, right? But this is a grown ass man. I'm 12 years old. She's 11, right? So he walks up to me. He says, "Hey, you called me a white boy?" And he says, "I'm not going to fight you because you're smaller than me, you're younger than me, but I'm going to get my boy over here to fight you," right? So he asked me, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 12. So he got his boy, who was about 14 years old, to fight me. And so because I'm from the Bronx and I grew up on the streets, I know that you can't back down from a fight because if you do, they're going to bully you. They're going to chase you if you run. They're going to walk behind you if you try to walk away. And they're going to try to punk you out. And it's going to be worse because they're going to abuse you. And I wasn't going to let that happen because I already know how it is, right? And so I stood up and I said, hey, listen, if I got to fight, I'm going to fight. And one of the girls, Gigi, Carmen, they just happened to be there. And they said, nah, man, leave him alone. Leave him alone. He's cool. And so they left me alone. And I went home. I got on the train on 110th Street. And I came back to Brook Avenue in the Bronx. And when I got there, I told my brother what happened. I said, hey, these guys, came up to me. They wanted to fight. And because I was by myself, there was nothing I could do. I had to stand up for myself. And if it wasn't for Gigi and Carmen, who knows what would have happened. And so we got some guys together. We got Negro. We got this guy named Timmy from across the street of 440. My brother Tonin, and this guy from Cyprus. He was part of the Chiba crew, right? And so we go down to Manhattan, 103rd Street in Spanish Harlem, with golf clubs, sticks, bats, right? Now, that was the biggest mistake we did, was going to somebody's turf, especially that loud, right? Walking around with sticks and bats like with a man. And so when we got there, we're asking around, hey, where's this guy? Where's this guy who wanted to fight me? Because I'm ready to fight. I'm not alone now. Now, I didn't want to fight before because actually I was scared. I was scared because I was alone. Even though I did agree to fight, I didn't want to fight because I was by myself. I didn't want to get jumped. So now I was emboldened. I felt more confident because I had my people with me, right? So we're asking around, where's this guy? Not Gemini, because I'm not going to fight him. He's a man. He's a grown man. I want to fight the guy that he got to fight me. So we're asking around. Nobody knew. Nobody was around, right? The block was empty. So we left. Now, when we went during the day. We get back on the train. We go back to Brook Avenue. We go back to the block in the Bronx. And we chill out. We hang out there for a little bit. And we decide to go back a few hours later. But then we decided that this time, because it was getting dark, we're going to leave the sticks, the bats, the golf clubs. We're going to leave everything behind. We're going to go incognito. We're going to go on the down low, a little more relaxed, right? Not so aggressive because we got to keep a low profile. Now, we get off the train. We're walking towards Spanish Harlem. We're walking towards 103rd Street. As we're getting closer, I noticed that there was a mob of people. It looked like war. And that's the first thing I thought to myself, right? As I got closer, I said, what the fuck? I said that in my mind. Is that war? Because it looked like there was a war. There must have been at least 1,000 guys out there. Now, I know that sounds exaggerating. Most people would think, oh, you were young and to you, it looked like there was 1,000 men. I'm telling you, there must have been at least 1,000 guys out there. And me, my brother Tonin, Negrito, Timmy didn't come back with us, the guy from the Chiba crew, and me, just my brother, Negro, the guy from the Chiba crew, and myself. 4 of us. We walked right into that war because that war and those 1,000 guys that were there were waiting for us. They were waiting for us. It just so happened that that white boy was part of the Zulu Nation. Now, the Zulu Nation was one of the most organized crews, not gangs, because the Zulu Nation was not a gang, it was a crew. They were very organized and they had chapters in every borough. They had chapters in the Bronx, in Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and anyone who was part of the Zulu nation had the Zulu beads, right? And if you wore Zulu beads and someone from the Zulu nation came up to you and asked you questions about your chapter and you couldn't respond, they would rip those Zulu beads off of your neck because it meant that you weren't really from the Zulu nation. You were just playing it off. And that was not something that they would let fly. And so this guy Gemini, this white boy, was part of the Zulu nation. So as we walked into that army, that war that was waiting for us, they surrounded us. You could hear someone saying, that's them, that's them. And they surrounded us. And as they surrounded us, of course, we all began to panic. And Negro, who had a leather jacket, put his hand in his jacket, pretending that he had a gun, because he didn't have a gun. And he's saying, yo, we come in peace. We come in peace, bro. We come in peace. And that's all we started to say. All of a sudden, we come in peace, right? And we're all saying, yo, we come in peace. We come in peace. And this guy, now we didn't know exactly what was going on, right? We knew that we were surrounded, but it still didn't click. It may have clicked for the other guys who were there with me, but it still hadn't clicked to me because a lot of the times when you walk into someone's neighborhood and you're not part of that block, you're going to be approached, right? That's not new for me. I've experienced that 1,000 times. And so I thought that was one of those times until I see among the crowds this guy walking towards us. And it just happened to be that white boy, Gemini, right? And so Gemini walks up to me. He says, what's going on? And so I say, hey, your boy wanted to fight. You wanted him to fight me. I was alone. And I didn't want to fight because I was alone. So I came back with my guys so we can fight. I was straight up. I mean, what else was I going to say, right? You got to man up. Where I come from, they respect you as a man when you act like a man, right? I mean, I was man enough to go there. Then I need to be man enough to stand up for myself and tell them exactly what I was doing there. And so I told them, I said, I was alone. You wanted me to fight this guy. I didn't want to fight, but now I'm with my friends, and that's why I came. So he said, what do you want to do? You want to fight? He asked the guy, you want to fight him? And the guy seemed hesitant. It looked like he didn't want to get involved in that. And obviously, I didn't want to get involved either, but now that I was there the second time, or the third time, because first the incident, we went there the first time with sticks and bats and golf clubs, and then we returned later on without anything. And so I had to man up. But I still didn't, after that, I didn't want to fight, but I had to keep up the what do you call it? I had to pretend that I wasn't afraid, I had to man up. And so the guy looked hesitant, like he didn't want to fight. So Gemini looked at me and he said to me, what do you want to do? You want to squash this, or do you want to take it to another level? Now, he didn't talk to all the other guys that were with me because they were older than me. I was the youngest, all right? I was 12. My brother was like 15. Negro was about 15 to 16. The guy from the Chiba crew, maybe 17, 18. We were just kids, right? And so he looks at me, he says, what do you want to do? So I looked at him and I said, let's squash it. Let's squash it. Now, where I come from, there was a certain level of respect. Crews respected each other and we avoided conflict as much as we could. Unlike today, right, where kids want to shoot each other, they don't face each other like men. They don't talk it out like men. And so I said, I want to squash it. Let's just squash it. I didn't want to die there. Trust me, we were going to die. There was no doubt about it. There was no way we were going to leave Manhattan, Spanish Harlem, alive. We were going to leave there in body bags. And so he said, all right, let's squash it. And then he pulls his hand into his leather jacket and he pulls out a machete. This machete was beautiful. The handle was made of ivory. It was carved. It had a beautiful design on it. I was pretty impressed with the machete, even though I was a little intimidated when he pulled it out. But for some reason, the design of the machete always stood with me, even till today, right? Now, these guys were prepared, trust me. Even if they didn't have any weapons, and if we did have guns, there was no way we were going to be able to use them. There was no way. None of us would have dared to even shoot any one of those guys. They definitely would have killed us. And so he pulled out the machete and he said, okay, let's squash it. And then he stood to the side like this. And he said, just like this, people, he said, let him go. And like Moses parting the Red Sea, those men, there must have been at least 1,000 of them, all moved to the side like this, the ones on the left, the ones on the right. It just split open as we walked by, and we simply walked right between the waters, right? And as we walked, not one of those guys said a thing to us. Not one of them. The only one who spoke was Gemini. None of those people spoke out of turn. And when we were walking away, they didn't spit at us. They didn't try to intimidate us. They weren't menacing to us. They were simply following the directions of that guy Gemini, who I'm assuming and guessing, and I probably true, that he was the leader of that chapter in the Zulu nation. And so they let us go without one hair that I used to have on my head being damaged. That's how organized these guys were. Now, that was the first and the last time that I ever went into somebody's block thinking I was the man. That was the biggest mistake I made. Never walk into someone else's block. I already knew that when I went there. But because I never seen any other man outside of this guy, Gemini, I didn't see, it wasn't like it was on my block on 139th Street where if you walk through, you're going to see 15, 20 guys playing outside, playing tag, ring-a-levia, stickball, baseball, tag, handball, kick the can, steal the bacon, Johnny on the pony. There were always guys out there. And because there weren't any guys there on 103rd Street, I simply assumed that the five of us were going to be okay, which was a mistake. And so to this day, I never made that mistake again. And that was my encounter with the Zulu nation back in the 80s when I was just 12 years old. And thank God that in those days, men were men. And even though I was 12 years old, I was already a man. I was a man by the time I was 11. Because by the time I was 11, I already had smoked marijuana. I did cocaine. I was drinking alcohol. Drugs weren't new to me. I knew where to buy them. I'd buy it for friends. Guys would just call me over and say, hey, Gijo, do me a favor. Can you go pick me up a 20 of green tape or yellow tape or white tape? Those were the different levels of cocaine. They came either in a green aluminum foil, a yellow aluminum foil, or white aluminum foil, and that's how they identified the type of cocaine it was. And so I would go to Brook Avenue to the candy store, and I go in there with $20 and I say, "Hi, let me get green tape." And they simply hand me the cocaine, and I go drop it off to one of the guys. And then they would open it up and they would give me a taste. Everybody had a little nail on their pinky, and they just scoop up the coke and snort it. And so that's how it was growing up. And thank God to this day, I was able to survive not just that incident, but other incidents that happened to me growing up in the Bronx. And so tune in again for another story of my Bronx tales so that you can hear more exciting stories of my life growing up in New York, growing up in the Bronx. I appreciate it, and thank you guys for watching.